Well, welcome everybody to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. We feature NFL legends, and today we get to talk about LA Ram, St. Louis Ram for one game, but really LA Ram, Jackie Slater, offensive lineman extraordinaire, big, powerful, strong. He had great feet, he had great talent, he had great power, he had great athleticism. And amongst all of that, he had great longevity. And we'll talk about all of that today. Along with Vincent Turner, our host, and Jeremiah Long, our producer, I'm Harper LeBel. And I've had the great privilege of meeting Jackie and getting to know him in a later life. My NFL connection with him is through the Harvard Pro Football Player Study. He's an advocate on that study. So there are things that Jackie has done after his NFL career to help other players and to assist in their physical, mental health and well-being. And Jackie was a part of so many different things. But today we want to honor the football player because of his football prowess. Born in 1954 on May 27th, Jackie Slater was birthed in Jackson, Mississippi. He was 6'4" by the time he was in high school and went off to college at Jackson State. Vincent, I don't know much about his high school. I know he went to Wingfield High School, but there's not a lot of data that I was able to find. And especially when you're talking about a lineman, there's not a whole lot of stats on the offensive side. So finding data about Jackie Slater prior to his collegiate days has been difficult. But boy, when he got to Jackson State, things certainly opened up for him in terms of his overall playing development, who he got to play with, as well as how he was able to start. Your thoughts about Jackie Slater?
You think about the left tackles that's played in the National Football League, right? All the great ones from Ron Yeri, Art Shell, Joe Thomas, Walter Jones, Jim Lachey, Willie Ross, Tony Buzzelli. But when you think about those gentlemen, you better put my man Jackie Slater in that conversation. Put respect on his name, because he was one of the greatest offensive tackles that played in the National Football League. He played 20 years, man, for the same team. But what I'm impressed about him is this right here. The people he blocked for: Walter Payton, Lawrence McCutcheon, Wendell Tyler, the great young man out of Sealy, Texas, Mr. Eric Dickerson, USC, boom, boom, Charlie White, or Charles White, Greg Bale, Cleveland Gary, any young man that lives here in the Atlanta area, the very talented Mr. Jerome Bettis, Notre Dame, Touchdown Jesus. Those are all the players that this man, Jackie Slater, voted for in his 20 years in the league. That's a very impressive list of running backs. But I think about when he got ready to leave Jackson State and he came into the 1976 draft, and I think about the 1975 All-American team. And here's Jackie Slater playing at little bitty Jackson State down in Jackson, Mississippi. And I look at the names that made the All-American team that year on the offensive line. Bob Simmons out of Texas, Dennis Lick out of Wisconsin, Ted Smith out of the Ohio State Buckeyes, Rick Bones out of Nebraska. You know what? When those guys went into the National Football League, there was a group of writers, sports writers, that said at least 2 or 3 of those guys are going to be Hall of Famers. None of them made it. Crickets. But you know what? This young man out of the third round, out of Jackson State University, played 20 years in the league and became one of the best offensive tackles that ever played in the National Football League. And he made the Hall of Fame. And I go back to the 1976 NFL draft, where you had Leroy Selman, you had Chuck Muncie, you had Joe Washington, you had Richard Todd, you had Tim Fox, you had Patrick Thomas, cornerback out of Texas A&M University, Sammy White out of Grambling State, Ben Williams out of Ole Miss, and Randy Cross out of UCLA. I guarantee you, at least 5 of those names I just mentioned, there was people saying they're going to be Hall of Famers. But nobody was thinking about the young man out of Jackson State in the third round that year. And think about the 2 players he played with at Jackson State that was his teammates. They both Hall of Famers. Sweetness, Walter Payton, Dr. Doom out of Mobile, Alabama, Robert Brazile. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that you had 3 NFL Hall of Famers on the same college team at the same time? Jackie was a 3-time SWAC player, a Conference Player of the Year, at least on the offensive line. He played in the SWAC All-Star Game, which they had back in those days. They would have a conference All-Star Game. He also played in the College All-American Game back in 1975, his senior year. So he had the ability to be recognized because of how good he was. Walter actually recruited him and said, "Man, you're coming to our place. I'll take you out. We'll go get a burger and some fries. I'll feed you. Well, okay, you can have my burger and fries too, big fella. I'm going to feed you, and we're going to take care of each other." And what a great decision that was for both. Jackie ended up playing well enough there. You mentioned he was a 3rd rounder, so he didn't have the highest of accolades in the middle of the pack in terms of the others back in those days, but what a difference he made. He did not start when he first got to the Rams. It took him 3 years, and the Rams were a pretty good team back then. When he was drafted, Chuck Knox was the head coach of the Rams, and Chuck was a guy that liked veteran players, and Jackie had to sit on the bench for a couple of years. He was on some special teams and some goal line situations, short yardage, of course, but really didn't get a chance to play until Ray Malavasi was the head coach. But the Rams were a very successful team. He went to a program that from the get-go, high expectations, go to the playoffs, win there. And for obvious reasons, I think that had a lot to do with him sharpening his skill set, waiting patiently for a chance to play, and going against some great guy, Merlin Olsen, who's a Hall of Famer. Larry Brooks was a part of that. Fred Dreyer, Jack Youngblood, a very good defensive line that he had to go up against every day in practice, work on his skill set, get a little better. But by 1978, he became a full-fledged starter.
I know a lot of people talk about Eric Dickerson when he first came in the league. You remember that first year, Eric Dickerson, I think, went over 1,800 yards. I think he set a rookie rushing record that year. And then the next year, Eric Dickerson had over 2,000 yards. I think he became the second back only in a single season to go over 2,000. Yep. But how do y'all think that he got all those yards? Who you think was up in them holes? Who do Eric Dickerson say today is one of the most inspirational people in his life? The young man from Jackson State, Jackie Slater. But I'm going to tell you what's really amazing about Jackie Slater. And just to tell you, he played a game for 20 years in the 70s and the 80s. See, I make no mistake. I don't show no apologies. Playing in the National Football League in the 80s, there was warriors. There was people that was about their business. To me, that is the roughest, toughest era of the National Football League in the 80s. Just look at all those great players. And I got somebody that can tell y'all the truth right now. The handsome Mr. Harper LeBel can tell you how serious it was. It was some super players. And Jackie Slater played in the 70s and played in the 80s. Yes, sir. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, when you talk about how tough it was in the 80s, go back even further into the 70s when you had guys that didn't have any teeth that were playing middle linebacker. And I'm talking about the great Jack Lambert. But Jackie's patience, again, paid off. 1979, he got the start in Super Bowl 14 against the Pittsburgh Steelers. They beat Dallas in Dallas for the first time in years, and then they go to Tampa in a defensive struggle. 3 field goals by Frank Correll end up helping the LA Rams beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, led by Doug Williams and Coach John McKay. 9-0 was the final there. But they got to go. And then the other great experience, I think, from a playoff perspective for him was going to Chicago and playing against the 1985 Bears in the NFC Championship game. The Rams lost. It was a tough day to play. The fans in Chicago were so happy for their team that they even cheered when it snowed late in the fourth quarter as the Rams inadvertently struggled to run. They struggled to pass. They couldn't do anything. But guess what? Welcome to an era where the best defense probably ever assembled. There are many that are close and similar to it, and you can argue for them. I'm not saying that, but you have to put the 85 Bears defense in its special spot in history. It may not be your number one on the pedestal, but it should be on the pedestal somewhere. They may be number 3 for you personally. For me, I thought they were the toughest ones, especially when it mattered most. Yes, they lost the one game against Miami on Monday night, but everything else was a very difficult task for anybody to play and to score against that Chicago Bears teams. The Rams certainly know that from a personal level. But Jackie got to be coached by some great guys. Chuck Knox, as I mentioned, Ray Malavasi, John Robinson was one of the first ones to believe in him as well. And I think that influenced him. You mentioned the Eric Dickerson. Eric Dickerson asked for Jackie Slater to be the one to induct him into Canton, Ohio. So that's what their relationship was like. 1979, he was a starter, as we mentioned. The 1980 Rams, he was they were second in the league in total offense. They brought in Eric Dickerson as a rookie in 1983. In 85, the Rams played in Chicago against the Bears in that NFC Championship. In 86, Eric Dickerson breaks the playoff record for most yards against Dallas with 248. He had 2 touchdowns that day. All great things that Jackie got to be a part of. He's the only player in the history of the NFL to play for the same team over 20 years in 3 different cities. That's kind of an unusual statistic, but they played, the Rams were obviously in LA. They moved to Anaheim. They didn't change their name, but they did change their location, and their home games were at Anaheim Stadium. And then in St. Louis, he played for the St. Louis Rams. Again, that was short in terms of its longevity. But prior to that, anyone that had played for one team for over 20 years, you have to go back to Lou the Toe Groza with Cleveland. He played 20 years with the same organization. Jackie then was the second. And then you had guys like Darryl Green. You had Jason Hanson. Jason was with Detroit. Darryl, of course, with Washington. And some young cat named Tom Brady, who played 20 years with the New England Patriots. So Jackie is in a very elite club when it comes to that as well. But in terms of his playing, Vincent, I'll tell you what, I recognize he had the big shoulder pads, which made him look much bigger than 6'4", although a big human being. But and then his helmet, it didn't fit right in his head. You could see half of the man's you could almost see his hairline. He had that very unique. If you look at the picture in the upper right when he's playing against Washington, that's the Jackie that I remember. Gosh, man, he looked bigger. It sat higher on his helmet. And it made him appear like more of a monster than he already was.
What I'm going to take away with Jackie Slater and about his great career, he blocked for 24 different starting quarterbacks. And he blocked for 37 different running backs. But most of all, when you think about Jackie Slater, and I don't want to go another direction, but think about this. His son, Matt Slater, has became one of the greatest special team players has played in the National Football League. And that's what's really amazing to me. Bloodline going down the bloodline. And of course, his son, I don't know how many rings he's won with the New England Patriots. I'm going to say at least 4. That's really special, man. Not only you became an offensive tackle that's played 20 years in the league, but your son has became a champion, playing on arguably the greatest organization in all of pro football, the New England Patriots, with arguably the greatest player, Mr. Tom Brady, with his 7 championships. That's what's special about Jackie Slater today. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yeah, I think that's pretty significant, too. When you think about the NFL royalty in terms of families, you've got the Manning family, the Matthews family, and the Slaters, obviously, with the father and son, the Super Bowl connectivity, the longevity of the career. There's a very special place for that. Jackie joined the 75 Rams. They were 12-2 under Chuck Knox. They beat St. Louis, but they lost to Dallas in the playoffs. 78, they were 12-4. They were a playoff team there also. They beat Minnesota that year, but lose to Dallas. In 79, they were only 9-7. And they were under Ray Malavasi. And as I mentioned, they beat Dallas, they beat Tampa, and they end up losing to the Steelers. And that, of course, how many times do you get to be an NFC champion? How many times do you get to play in a Super Bowl? He got at least one. And congratulations to him for that. He was a 2001 member of the National Football League Hall of Fame. So obviously that gold jacket is something that everybody else, including the main writers and contributors from a media standpoint, they recognized his significance and what he was able to do. It is not easy to be a left tackle. It is not easy to be a great left tackle. And he ended up doing both of those. You mentioned the different quarterbacks and running backs that he played for. Here are a look at some of the statistics about Jackie Slater. 7 times he was a Pro Bowler. 4 times he was a second-team Pro Bowler. There was one ahead of him, but they have 2 that are selected, and Jackie got to do that an additional 4 times in his career. He is in the St. Louis Ring of Fame. He has his number 78 that has been retired by the LA Rams. He won the Bart Starr Award in 1996. I know a little bit about that. He was the NFL Man of the Year, and he was a 1979 NFL champion. But most importantly, as I mentioned, he has a gold jacket and was included in the 2001 NFL class for the Hall of Fame.
Yes, sir. My final words today about Jackie Slater. I'm going to keep it short and sweet here on 100 Yards of Football. Outstanding football player out of Jackson, Mississippi, Jackson State. Remember this guy, he died in a plane crash, but he ended up being one of my best singers all the time that I followed him, and I almost really was so upset I didn't want to go outside for a couple of days. The great Jim Croce. Remember he had a song, Bad, Bad, Leroy Brown.
He was the baddest man in the whole dang town.
Jackie Slater. Back to you, Mr. LeBel.
Yep, that was his nickname, Big Bad. I love it. So Jackie, fantastic individual, above average in so many different ways, but as a player, he was one of the best of all time. So we want to honor Jackie Slater as our NFL legend here this morning. We appreciate that. His connectivity, obviously, to Jackson State with Walter Payton, with Robert Brazile. The 3 of them were teammates in college together, and obviously the hundreds of teammates that he was a part of with the LA Rams organization. I'm sure they all tip their cap to the man as well and acknowledge what a significant impact that he had on their lives and on the LA Ram franchise, and his career has exceeded everybody's expectations. What a great honor it is for us to be able to talk about him. So we want to thank you for viewing our show today. For Jeremiah Long, our producer, and for Vincent Turner, our host, I'm Harper LeBel. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, the NFL Legends Edition with Jackie Slater. We appreciate it. Thank you for being a part of today's program. Have a fantastic day, everybody.